Well, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for coming out to MIX. Are you having a good time so far? All right, all right. I got to say, I've had the most interesting experience a little bit earlier. This is the first time I've actually come to give a technical session where I've had to walk through a casino floor. Still kind of got big numbers and flashing lights in my head, but I'm going to go ahead and save my luck for the demos. I'm really excited to be here at MIX to be able to talk to you about Atlas and to get your thoughts on the kinds of the vision for the kinds of things you're building on the next generation of the web, and to talk with you about how we can make that vision possible with some technologies like Atlas. So today's talk is going to focus, is going to be a developer-focused talk where we're going to go ahead and drill down into the Atlas framework and look at how it can help you build richer web user experiences. This is actually the first of several talks. Tomorrow, Brad and Rick are going to actually take a real site and look at how to raise the user experience of that site using some of the concepts that you're going to see here today. We're also going to have a talk tomorrow on how to use Atlas to build gadgets for Live.com. The March release of Atlas lets you do that, and Sanaz is going to be talking about that. And then Wednesday, Nikhil's got a great talk on how you can use the Atlas script framework to build kind of richer mashups and client-centric components and gadgets for the programmable web. So what do I mean by a better web user experience? Well, if you're building websites on the internet with customers, you probably have a good idea of what this means to you. You want to build the kind of unique, differentiated experiences that really kind of draw and attract customers and ultimately drive and increase the revenue for your site. The next generation of applications and sites on the web are going to be a lot more responsive to kind of user interaction, and they're going to provide a more natural, more interactive ways for users to go and navigate information, to view information, and to work with content. They're also going to be more personalized, and sites and users will kind of work together to figure out how to tailor that information to the user's need to help them get where they need to faster. And web experiences for the next generation are also going to kind of break beyond the walls of the site and become more connected, whether it's being more present across the web through things like services and gadgets, or whether it's just having kind of a richer integration with the user's overall experience with some immersive things like instant messenger and the Windows sidebar. So these kinds of experiences are really going to kind of change the way web applications are. But they also bring in some new challenges as developers for being able to build them. So there are a lot of new technologies and new kind of ways of developing. And there are also a lot of old technologies, things like DHTML and JavaScript, that we're looking at kind of in new ways now. And as developers, what we really need is the ability to have kind of the frameworks and tools that help you get that same level of productivity that you want when you're building these kinds of new experiences. So Atlas is all about providing that level of productivity to help you build the next level of rich web experiences. Atlas includes a rich framework that makes it very, very easy to start building rich experiences, but then it includes kind of a rich set of patterns that you can use to build components and build applications that are more complex, that use better client-side functionality to deliver greater richness. Atlas also integrates really well with the programming model on the server, so you can start using and leveraging the server investments you have today to build these new applications. And with Atlas, we're also going to have a great set of tools for both designers, developers, and testers to be able to work together to kind of design and develop the experiences for the web, and then to be able to test them, debug them, and deploy them very easily. As with Ajax, Atlas is all completely cross-platform. The Atlas script runtime runs on any browser, on any platform, any modern browser. And the Atlas client script framework will also run on any server and doesn't require ASP.NET on the server. So when you're building kind of an AJAX-style application with Atlas, there are really kind of two ends of the programming model to think about. The first is this kind of server-centric application model. And if you're building traditional web apps that have a server end, something like ASP.NET or PHP, this is a pretty familiar model. The server actually runs the application logic and goes ahead and renders the UI, which it sends to the browser as HTML. And then the browser will then go back and connect to the server to get new HTML. And within this space, you can start building richer experiences by making those kinds of connections back to the server more incremental, more fine-grained than the whole page. And you can start adding kind of richer interactivity within the browser. On the other end, then, is the kind of client-centric application model. And in this model, the whole presentation tier actually runs completely in the browser using DHTML and JavaScript. And the server is really kind of used for services and data and as a kind of a services platform for the browser. This model kind of gives you a lot more richness. It's closer to the kind of client application model, but it is a substantial difference from the server model. So when you decide kind of which of these two to use, well, each actually has its own strengths and kind of typical scenarios. And they really kind of lie on a continuum. So with server-centric models, you can start building them on top of the existing programming model you have today. And a big win for that is that if you're using things like C# and ASP.NET to build your applications, you can just readily start building richer experiences without having to go back and learn JavaScript and go ahead and get new tools and rewrite your pages and all those kinds of things. You can also keep kind of your core UI and application logic on the server. And so you can kind of, if you're building kind of more closed applications that have rich experiences, you can go and kind of control that programming model very easily. And then within that space, you can then start improving experiences, improving the latency and responsiveness of your app, and adding interactivity. With client-centric apps, you can really kind of go well beyond kind of the typical browser app and start taking complete advantage of everything that the DHTML and JavaScript platform have to offer. I think in Scott's keynote earlier, you saw a couple of examples of that. In this model, you can actually go ahead and still use the AJAX model for being able to access data and services. But what you're really doing is taking a lot of the kind of presentation tier and kind of UI composition functionality and sending it down from the server to the client, where you can kind of offload some of that and really take advantage of the processing power of the desktop. This model also lets you kind of go beyond kind of standard websites into more immersive models where, for example, on the Windows sidebar, you might have a HTML-based gadget that's really kind of running the presentation tier directly in the sidebar and is only going to the server occasionally to get things like data from RSS. And so it enables you to build those kinds of experiences. So typically, your app's going to sit somewhere on that continuum. But the great thing is that Atlas actually lets you build apps very easily for either of those models and to be able to combine some of those things very easily. So let's go ahead and take a look at how you build kind of rich server-centric applications with the Atlas server controls for ASP.NET. The Atlas server controls really have one big key goal. They enable you to build really rich kind of experiences with ASP.NET without having to write very much JavaScript at all, without having to go and learn the client script programming model, or without having to go and think about how the asynchronous communication works over XML HTTP. Instead, you get to use the same programming model that you know today, which is ASP.NET and ASP.NET server controls, and you get to use the same kind of programming languages and tools that you get to use today. On top of that, then, you can start taking either existing apps and starting to enrich them, or you can start building new apps in ASP.NET where you can do things like improve, reduce the number of full round trips to the server, or add kind of more natural interactive UI on the client. Things like, things like drag and drop, and things like, richer tooltips and data visualizations. So one of the key concepts in the ASP.NET Atlas server controls is this concept of the update panel. So when you're building a server-centric application, typically every time you kind of post back to the server, causes a whole page refresh, changes the browser history, all those kinds of things. So what you'd really like to do is to be able to control that on a much more fine-grained basis and be able to take your page and kind of divide that up into parts of your page that can be independently updated without causing the whole browser state to refresh. So the update panel pattern kind of gives you a very simple way of just marking parts of the page that can be updated independently. And Atlas handles all of the infrastructure and the kind of state management that goes on back and forth. So in this case, I've taken a calendar control and just wrapped it in an update panel to make that thing independently updatable. So let's go ahead to the demo machine and start to look at some examples of the update panel control in action. So this is a very basic update panel example. On my page here, I've got a couple of Atlas controls. This is an ASP.NET page. The first is the script manager. And the script manager really kind of takes care of sending down the right set of scripts to the client so that your ASP.NET page can use Atlas. And one of the things the script manager does is it automatically detects what browser you're using, and it sends down the right part of Atlas's browser compatibility layer to the client, so the browser gets the right set of scripts. In this case, I've also set a property on that control to turn on partial rendering so that you can use this update panel functionality. And then within the update panel, then, I've just got some UI, and then I've got a button down here that allows you to go ahead and update the update panel. Typically, if you have buttons or other UI that update the update panel that are inside the update panel, you don't need to actually have a trigger. It will actually force the update panel to go and update. But when it's outside the update panel, you can use these hints called triggers to go and indicate to the page framework that this button is going to cause a partial refresh of this update panel. So if we go ahead and run this, you'll notice that if I click this button, only the update panel itself refreshes. Now the other button, because it's not part of the trigger, will actually cause the full page to refresh. One of the advantages of this is that you can start taking an existing ASP.NET page and start incrementally adding this kind of rich functionality, and it's not going to go ahead and break the functionality that's already on your site. So let's take a look at a slightly more complex example. In this page, I've only got a single update panel, but typically you're going to have multiple update panels on a page. And some of those update panels may be completely independent of each other. So when you send up a partial update, every update panel by default is actually updated. Now, if you've got two parts of your page, like let's say you've got a portal page where there are many different kind of modules that are independent, it doesn't make a lot of sense to actually force all of them to update every time there's a click. And so to optimize that, what you can do is go ahead and make an update panel conditional by setting the mode equals conditional property on the update panel. And this basically goes ahead and says that this update panel will only refresh when the refresh has been caused by one of the triggers that the update panel has. So if I go ahead and run this, you'll notice that when I trigger the second panel, the first panel doesn't update because it's conditional. But when I trigger the first panel, both update panels actually update. Now, you might be building a page like this, and then somewhere in the server logic, you suddenly realize, hey, wait a sec, I've got to go ahead and update panels that are not currently being updated. So from the server side, you can actually force that to be updated by just calling the update method on a panel. And in this case, I've got a third button that can force that first panel to be updated, even though it's been set to conditional. And so with these kinds of settings, you can very easily kind of optimize the way your page updates and really create a much more fine-grained update model for your page. Now, when you're doing an update that's going to be a lengthy operation, when it's a full page, you get the standard IE little rotating globe or whatever browser. You get some indication it's going back to the server. When you're doing these kind of partial updates, you want to have some user responsiveness that says that it's making the updates. And you saw this in Scott's talk, but all you have to do is add this kind of Atlas update progress control to your page. With some UI in it, you can put just about anything in it. And this progress control only becomes visible when it's making this partial update back to the server. So if I go ahead and run this page, I've introduced kind of a delay on the server side intentionally. I can go ahead and click this button, and I'm going to get that nice little progress meter. And so that kind of provides some good user response. Another interesting kind of scenario for update panels is when you have some content that's going to update on a frequent interval. Like let's say you've got some stock quotes or other information on your page. You want to go and update that. What we've done is actually introduce a timer control. And the timer control lets you set any kind of interval on the page and just go ahead and post back an event to the server. Now, when you use the timer control with an update panel, it just causes that update panel to refresh. So I've got a page here, and you'll notice that every couple of seconds, the timer control will refresh. So this gives you, a pretty good set of control with the update panel and with its associated controls. Gives you a really good set of features to work with to make your page more responsive. So let's get back to the slides. So now that you've got that kind of richer responsiveness, the next thing we want to do is actually be able to add kind of more natural, greater interactivity to your client. And to do this, Atlas includes a concept called Atlas Client Behaviors. Behaviors are basically just kind of bits of JavaScript functionality that are easily kind of wrapped up into a Atlas client component. And then you can then go ahead and attach that to any piece of HTML to add that kind of rich functionality. And this is done in a completely cross-browser kind of way. So examples of that we provide support for right out of the box are being, for example, you can do drag and drop on the client within the browser. You can do things like tooltips and pop-ups, as well as interesting things like autocomplete text boxes. We provide a set out of the box, but it's actually very easy if you know JavaScript to go ahead and extend or write your own and plug those into the client script framework. From the server side, what we do is actually go ahead and wrap those client controls, client behaviors, in something that we call control extenders. Control extenders let you take advantage of these kind of rich behaviors in the same programming model that you know today. So you can just use ASP.NET controls and then go ahead and write control extenders that just point to them to extend the functionality. In this case, I've got an ASP.NET text box control. And what I've done is gone ahead and added a autocomplete extender that just adds that autocomplete functionality to a text box. Let's go ahead to the demos and take a look at some more examples of how you build these extenders. So let's go ahead and actually build out that autocomplete functionality for a text box. Autocomplete is kind of an interesting pattern to be able to provide kind of more responsive user input. So you can provide not just word completion, but you can use that pattern to do things like provide alternate spellings, return kind of user preferences, and you can use that same autocomplete pattern to do all of those things. So to build one of those, the first thing that you need to do is go ahead and build out a web service, and you can use ASP.NET Web Services, you can use WCF, and you can go ahead and build a method that just takes a prefix text and a number of items, and then returns an array of strings. So this is just a basic method here. This functionality, once you actually build this as a web service on the server, is now accessible to the Atlas client script framework as a script service because of the way Atlas and ASP.NET kind of integrate with each other. But what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and use a autocomplete extender to take advantage of this. Let's go ahead and take a look at the text box control. And you'll notice what I've done here is add an autocomplete extender. A single extender can actually extend multiple controls. So for each control, I've got an autocomplete properties tag, and that actually points to the text box it needs to extend and specifies the web service to call and the method to call to get the autocomplete. So if I go ahead and run this, go ahead and type some letters, you'll notice that I now get this really rich autocomplete drop-down automatically. Again, I didn't actually have to write any JavaScript. The Atlas client script behavior is really easily accessible from HTML. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of other examples. If I've got a rich site, one of the things I'd like to do is let people be able to group that, group UI on that site into kind of floating windows that they can go and manipulate. Unfortunately, HTML doesn't actually have kind of built-in functionality to do windows within the page. And to write that kind of functionality, you've got to go ahead and kind of handle drag and drop events and all those kinds of things. What we've done is take that functionality and wrap it into a floating behavior on the client, and then we've made that available as an extender on the server. So I've got a div here, essentially a panel control, which is ASP.NET's kind of server control for a div. And then I've taken a drag overlay extender and just used it to point to that panel and enable that functionality. So if I go ahead and run this, I can now pick up this panel and drag and drop it around and place it anywhere I want. All right, so that adds the floating functionality, but what I'd really like to do is to make that a personalized experience. If the user's gone and moved that to some place, I'd like to respect kind of the user setting and let them customize the site the way they want. What ASP.NET actually has is this thing called a profile service that really makes that easy. So the ASP.NET profile service is a service that runs on the server and lets you store kind of per user settings. And with Atlas, that functionality is now available from the client as well. So to enable us to personalize that setting, we just go into web.config. And in the config file, we'll add a new profile property. I'll call it panel location here, and make that property accessible to anonymous users. And then I need to go back into the page that I had and add a couple of things. I'll add a profile script service. And this basically lets Atlas know, Atlas give access to the profile service from the client script. And then I can just go ahead and go to the drag overlay extender, add the profile property I just added to say this is the property it should use to save. Let's go ahead and run this. And now I can drag and drop this around, and when I reload the browser, it actually remembers the user's setting. I can go ahead and close that up and rerun it, and again, it'll restore the user's setting. So it's now saved on the server. It's a sticky setting. I can use that from anywhere on the internet. And again, this kind of rich functionality that integrates some behavior on the client and on the server was very easy to do without having to write any kind of JavaScript. Now we've got a set of extenders that kind of ship in the box. In addition, we're actually building a whole rich kind of set of extenders that we're going to make available in source code form so that you can start taking those extenders and customizing them and putting them in your app. Here I've got an example of one of those, and it's called It's called a hover menu extender. And the hover menu extender basically lets you show some additional UI when the user kind of goes and hovers over some part of the page. So you can use it for a pretty rich variety of things. You can use it for tooltips. You can use it for kind of mouse over effects. You can use it for kind of floating hover menus. What I've done here is actually taken an image on the page and I've created a second panel here that represents my kind of hover menu image. And then I've added this hover menu extender, and the target control ID here specifies the panel that you want to provide the hover effect for, and the pop-up control specifies the panel you want to use as the hover ID. And then you can go ahead and customize the way that thing then appears. So if I go ahead and run this, I've now got this image on the page, and when I go and hover over that, I now get this rich hover effect. And again, I didn't have to actually go ahead and write any JavaScript to enable this to happen. So let's go ahead and take a look at putting some of these things into action into a real app. And what I've got here is kind of a mashup that's been written in ASP.NET. So it completely uses ASP.NET for UI. There's actually, I think, one line of script in this. And what it does is it provides kind of a unified search. So if I go ahead and type a search query, it's going to go and look up web and news searches from MSN. It's going to go ahead and look for books, images, and blogs using some of the web services that are available on the internet. And then it's going to present that in a kind of single way. Just for kicks, I'm going to go ahead and run this app in Firefox. So let's go ahead and paste this into Firefox. And when I do a query, you'll notice that the autocomplete behavior is actually hooked up to this text box. What it's doing here is actually looking up the set of recent queries I've done and providing me an ability to go and look up my past queries and requery them. So I'll pick Atlas in this case. Let's click Go. You'll notice I get that update progress control as I'm clicking around on the page. I've also made use of the update panel to provide a rich kind of update model to this page. You'll notice that there are actually 3 levels of navigation here. There's kind of the page UI, there are the tabs on the top, and then there's the search UI as well. So there are a couple of layers of update panel controls to really optimize the way that refreshes. Now, one of the things this page lets me do is actually add any of the links that I have to kind of a grab bag that I can come back and look at. And so I've used the hover menu here to let you be able to add any of these links to my update panel. The second thing that I've done is actually added the hover menu behavior to the images. So you'll notice that as I kind of drag over these images, I now get these richer effects, a larger UI, and I can go ahead and add those things to my back to look at. So kind of a very simple way of taking any kind of app and enriching that experience is something that the Atlas Server Controls provides without really having to write JavaScript and without having to think about kind of the client-centric programming model. So let's get back here. Oops. All right, so as you can see, the Atlas Server Controls makes it super, super easy to build kind of rich web experiences. But a lot of the functionality for these experiences is actually happening in the client framework in the browser. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Atlas Script Framework and look at how you can use it to build client-centric web applications. So as you're moving more of your kind of rich functionality to the client, the JavaScript that's running on the client starts to be bigger than just kind of simple event handlers and simple code. What you start to need is kind of richer object models and richer programming models and richer frameworks that you can use to put these kinds of applications together. And that's what the Atlas Script Framework provides. It has a set of patterns on top of JavaScript for being able to do better object-oriented development, so kind of richer type system things like inheritance and event handlers and interfaces. And then on top of that, it then has kind of a rich component model that you can use to take these kind of encapsulated pieces of JavaScript functionality and just kind of wire them together to build applications so that you're not having to write a lot of JavaScript glue. The other aspect of kind of running running rich applications in the browser is being able to connect back to the server to get services and data. And with the Atlas framework, we made it really, really easy to go and connect to servers and go and call services and get data back. So let's go ahead and take a look at that networking stack in a little more detail. So the Atlas networking stack basically provides a set of kind of useful abstractions on top of the basic XML HTTP model that's in the browser. So you get a rich networking stack that includes some higher level classes, things like request and response objects. And then it has a set of patterns for being able to easily do RPC to the server. This network layer has a lot of functionality for being able to do things like batch up requests. So if you're making a lot of requests to the server, you can go ahead and actually batch them up easily to kind of optimize network traffic. The whole network layer is very pluggable in terms of the data formats and the wire protocols we use. By default, we're actually using the JSON data format, which is very easy to parse and bring back into JavaScript, and the REST networking model, which is a very lightweight model for being able to do RPC in these kinds of AJAX-style applications. On the server side, one of the things that we've done then is really gone and integrated this client networking stack with ASP.NET on the server. So you can go ahead and build ASP.NET web services or WCF web services, or just go ahead and host components in ASP.NET and then make them very easily accessible directly from within the browser from script. And underneath the covers, Atlas takes care of kind of all the work of serializing objects and taking some of the object models that you have on the server and bringing them down and projecting them in a way that you get this consistent kind of object model to work against when you're working with objects that are coming from the server. When you're building these kinds of apps and you're building these kinds of services, one of the questions that we often hear is, how can I go ahead and secure these things and lock them down so that if I'm building an application that has a lot of services, I can go and control them? Well, ASP.NET actually has a rich set of features for being able to secure these services through authentication and role-based authorization. And with Atlas, that functionality is completely integrated in. So you can use the same model that you do with ASP.NET services today to go and control the security for your Atlas apps. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of networking. So you saw the autocomplete service in an earlier example. What I've got here is another web service that basically provides a simple service on top of a list of task items. So there's a task item object that's in my middle tier, and I've got some methods to be able to return a list of task items, as well as go ahead and actually update or insert a new one by calling the save method. So this is kind of a standard web service. If I go ahead and run this, I get the standard ASP.NET test page. But because Atlas has been installed on the server, this web service has now been Atlas enabled. So if I go ahead and just add /JS to it, you'll notice that I now get a, let me bump up the font size a bit for this one. You now get this JavaScript client proxy for that web service that allows you to access that service directly from within JavaScript. And what it's doing is it's actually going against the Atlas script framework on the client to be able to connect back to the server and do that exchange. So to use this service, I can go ahead and write a very simple page. And you'll notice that to include that service, all I really need to do is kind of include that URL into my page in a script tag. And now that service becomes available to me from within the client. So I can just go ahead and call getAllTasks. Because that call is asynchronous, I can provide a kind of a completion method that when it's called back gives me the list of items. And I can also go ahead and just new up a task item object, set some properties on it, and then just go ahead and call the save method. And again, the Atlas framework takes care of turning this JavaScript object into a real task item object on the server side. So if I go ahead and run this page, you'll notice that I can get the number of items. I can also go ahead and add a new task. So if I take a look at how this service is accessible and what it actually returns, one of the things I've gone and done here is enable the ability to call this service with a get method. Typically, you'll want to actually decide explicitly whether you want to make a service available through kind of get methods on HTTP, or whether you're going to require a server post. And the reason for that is when you have a get method, it is possible for somebody to do kind of a cross-site operation that causes that get method to happen on the server. And so you're going to want to decide, for example, if you've got an authenticated service, you're going to want it to be authenticated before you can allow that. But what we've done is just gone and made that accessible from a get method by setting this web operation attribute and making it accessible as a get. So if I go ahead and run this thing here with the method name, you'll notice, unfortunately, IE doesn't make this any bigger, but you'll notice that the data it returns, I'll show you a slightly more detailed version. You'll notice that the method it returns is actually in this JSON format that includes the list of objects. And I can just go ahead on the client side and evaluate this into a set of objects that I can then go ahead and code against. So the networking stack really makes it easy to be able to access services from your client app. Let's get back to the presentation. But how do you go from having something like this to having apps that are like this? Obviously, you're going to need a lot more richer client UI on the client. And that means going from just kind of a procedural JavaScript model to having more of an object-oriented framework. And Atlas actually includes this rich kind of component model that provides a framework for building these kinds of apps. Atlas has a set of components that let you just take kind of UI behavior as well as non-UI behavior and just package those things into some rich client-side components. And then you can then go ahead and wire those things up very easily to build an app. This model also supports a really nice kind of separation of your HTML from your client-side behavior. So you can actually, as I'm sure, as I do, I'm sure many of you kind of rely on designers to actually define the look and feel of your site. And what you can do is actually separate out the HTML of your app and just have a designer go ahead and party on that, make it as rich as possible. And then you can go ahead kind of on the side, go ahead and add the behavior for the page. And you can do that either procedurally. So for example, here I've got a text box. And what I've done is actually, using JavaScript, gone and attached an autocomplete behavior to that. Or you can do it declaratively through this thing that we call XML script. An XML script basically provides a declarative model for being able to define what components you have and let you wire them up. This model is more toolable, and it's also easier to generate kind of from server frameworks. But you're going to want to decide whether you want to use the declarative model or more of the procedural JavaScript model to build your apps. And it's kind of a matter of preference to some people, but we do allow being able to use either from Atlas. Now, once you've actually built kind of the UI of your control, you need to be able to kind of pour data into that and to build kind of richer data-centric experiences that work with data from the server. So to do that, we actually provide a whole set of functionality to be able to pull down data from the server and kind of run it in the client, go ahead and render it richly, do operations against it, send it back to the server. So we have a Atlas data component that works very much like a kind of disconnected data set in JavaScript. So it has all the kinds of features like filtering and sorting on the client side. You can go ahead and declaratively data bind to that. And then it's integrated with ASP.NET on the server. So you can go ahead, call a select operation on the server, get back a set of data, go ahead and do some batched operations, and go and merge those changes back to the server. So it provides a really kind of nice model for client data. We also have this thing called the list view client control, which basically gives you the ability to just do templated rendering of data, so that if you're building your UI with HTML, you can then data bind that and show really rich UI. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of client components and data at work. So I built that service a little earlier to return a set of tasks. What I've got here is a page that has a couple of things. One, I've got a text box here with an autocomplete, just for kind of completeness. I thought just throw in an autocomplete there. But what I've got here is some HTML that actually represents the template that's going to be used to render each item that comes back. And so you can see that this is completely kind of separated out from the actual behavior of the page. So I can go and hand this thing off to a designer and have them go ahead and customize that any way they want using XHTML and CSS. And then separately here, I've got this script markup, this declarative script, that then adds the dynamic behavior. So I've got a list view control that kind of goes and points to that results item. And within that, I can go ahead and define templates. So I've got an item template here with some controls that are, again, bound to the HTML UI that's generating this template. And what this lets me do is very easily create kind of declarative data binding. So I've got that task item back from the server. I can go ahead and easily data bind the checkbox to it by adding a new binding and binding the completed property of the task item that comes back to the check property of the checkbox. So if I go ahead and run this page, and I call get tasks, I'll now get this rich kind of templated UI. And this kind of templated UI and this data binding model supports both one-way and two-way data binding. So you can do rich kind of edit scenarios very easily. The gadget example that you saw in Scott's keynote earlier today actually uses this model to let you, start editing right on the surface of a gadget. So it gives you kind of some really rich data experiences using the client model. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. So earlier I mentioned that the Atlas client script library actually works with any browser, not just ASP.NET. But I've shown a lot of examples of how Atlas and ASP.NET really kind of integrate together to provide a really rich experience end-to-end. Well, what if you do want to use Atlas without ASP.NET? To use Atlas without ASP.NET, it's actually quite easy. When you go ahead and get the Atlas bits, you can pull the Atlas client scripts out of the program files directory and just drop them into your web project of your choice. What you do need to then go ahead and do is actually build a lot of the server integration and the server functionality that ASP.NET provides. So some of the integration with your server-centric UI and whatever programming model you're using on the server. The ability to detect browsers and send down the right scripts, as well as some of the integration with services and the application services that ASP.NET provides. Excuse me. So what I've actually gone and done is built a little prototype to demonstrate this, where I've got Atlas running on top of an Apache web server that's running PHP. So let's go ahead and take a look at that app. And what I've done is replicated that last page that you saw running in PHP. So I've got many of the same files here. The pages are written in PHP, but the HTML page is actually fairly identical to the PHP page. All I had to do was add the script tag manually instead of use the script manager control, and then change the URLs to point to PHP URLs. In the Atlas PHP directory, I've got a few different files. So what I've used is a PHP JSON serializer that's available for free on the internet. And then I've added some additional functionality, for example, to be able to generate script client proxies automatically from a web service. And I provided kind of a base class for you to use as a web service base class for when you're building web services in PHP that Atlas can access. So let's go ahead and actually run this. And we're going to go ahead and start up our Apache web server and go ahead and change the URL here. And you'll notice I get this exact same URL, exact same UI. I can go ahead and do autocomplete and get the same functionality. And when I do get tasks, I now get a set of tasks from the PHP server. So there you go, Atlas running on top of PHP. So if you're interested in exploring this, we're actually going to be handing out the bits for that. I'm going to put it on my blog. And if you're interested in kind of building out a richer PHP solution that works with Atlas, please definitely come and see me, and we'll chat more. All right. So hopefully so as you can see, kind of Atlas makes it really, really easy to build these kinds of richer web user experiences, both with a server-centric model that integrates really well with ASP.NET and lets you build richer apps without having to write JavaScript, as well as with this rich client framework that you can easily use to build more client-centric applications and kind of go beyond the browser. So we'd really like you to get these bits and start using them. As Scott mentioned, we're really excited to have the Go Live CTP available that you can actually use to start putting the apps you build on the web. And we'd like you to go and try those things out and give us the feedback and help us go and refine Atlas and make it a product, a great product for building the next generation of web apps. I'd like to also invite you to join our community at atlas.asp.net. Here you can get the latest bits. We're going to be refreshing them roughly every 6 to 8 weeks. You can also get lots of kind of tutorials and samples. There are a set of forums to join, and we'd really love for you to participate in those forums and in the community to provide us some great feedback. All right, so I thank you for your time, and I look forward to chatting with many of you during the rest of the conference about Atlas. Thanks.